is going on? No Horsing Around family. Zach Boyd back at it again. And as always, the No Horsing Around podcast is sponsored by WagerWire. Head on over to www.wagerwire.com to place all of your bets. Guys, you can place live bets. You can trade the bets before it. You can cash out before the buzzer. If you want to go out there and bet on those Indiana Pacers like I do every once in a while, get a little bit of scratch on Tyrese Halliburton, that over points and assist, head on over to WagerWire, place your bets, and let them know we sent you. Guys, we're so excited to have Kevin Bowen back again. Been a big week, Kevin. I know you've had a lot going on with your podcast, your show, and everything. But I'll just start it right here. I was listening to Shane Steichen, and I went back to something I heard from a coach who's actually not our coach. He's a Tennessee Titans coach, Mike Vrabel. And they asked him what was going on, in the situation when they were going for the slide. And he said to them, we need to talk less and do more. And that is exactly the impression I got from Shane Steichen in that presser. Not a lot of talk, straight to the point, but you feel really encouraged by the way that he handles things. Just some of your initial thoughts with Shane Steichen as you was there for that presser.
Yeah, it's funny when you walk into that room on Tuesday, that's probably what I was most curious about, just, the type of communicator he is, and obviously just the whirlwind of emotions he had to be going through, from losing the Super Bowl to, coming straight here to Indianapolis and all of that, and, the biggest professional moment of his life, whether that be Sunday or, certainly Tuesday as well. And once he got through the emotions of thanking people, and understandably, I mean, he's a human being, and you saw that. Once the Q&A of football-specific questions started, that dude does not waste words. I said this earlier in the week. Some people, you have to hear them talk for 3-4 minutes, and then you're like, oh, man, maybe they are kind of smart because they just said a bunch of words, and it sounded like they knew what they were talking about, and it sounded smart at different parts. Shane Steichen's not that. He speaks for 20-30 seconds, and you know that he's direct. He speaks with conviction, and you can certainly feel and hear his intelligence. And I think that's a really important way to communicate. Jim Irsay, I thought he was really good on Tuesday. Maybe I'm kind of holding Irsay to the Irsay standard, but I thought there were moments there where you really found some detail of why he really fell in love with Steichen. And one of it was just the ability to take in information and then give that information out in a very quick and an efficient manner. And that's so much of what communicating is about, leading is about, certainly being a head football coach is about as well. And that was my biggest takeaway, I thought, from him on Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, a lot had been made about the extensive research or the extensive hiring process that we went through, multiple rounds, hours of, just delegating these things. I think they even mentioned that at one point that Jim Irsay, night before that the contingent got there, they spent 5 hours, just getting to know him, and he was blown away from that, and kind of separated himself from the rest of the pack. Kevin, when you think about his philosophy and what he can bring to this football team, you got to love the fact that he's worked with multiple quarterbacks that play all different styles of football, but they all translated to a winning style of football, which has to make you feel pretty good as you're sitting there with that 4th pick in this draft.
Easily. Yeah, it does not back you into a corner. It does not pigeonhole you at all because, when you look at the quarterbacks, and if you want to narrow it down to those 4 guys, they all are certainly different styles of quarterbacks. So I do feel like that is arguably his best attribute given the state of the Colts. And that was another kind of Irsay thing that he mentioned a couple of times was, there's an offensive magic to Shane Steichen, and we need that right now as a franchise, is what Irsay was saying. I mean, I don't want to go back to last season, but this was a historically bad offense, not just Colts bad. I mean, NFL bad. And you are picking at 4. You might not have your choice of the number 1 or 2 guy, depending on, trade up and all of that. So, development could be a huge element. And obviously it's an element for any sort of rookie, but you might be needing more of that. And Steichen clearly has done that. Again, he's been around 3 very different styles, very different ages. The systems from Norv Turner with the Chargers to Jalen Hurts, what we saw on Sunday night, is extremely different. I thought his comments, Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts specific, was just like modern football to a T. I mean, the college game is different. It is unique. It looks very different than what a lot of the NFL wants to be about. But instead of refusing to adapt or ignoring, you've got to kind of embrace that to a degree and find out what that quarterback does well, whether it be at Oregon for Herbert or whether it be at Alabama and Oklahoma for Hurts, and implement some of that stuff. And if you watch Herbert, and especially if you watch Hurts, they certainly did that. So I thought that was a great comment that he made. Obviously, the pass to score and the run to win comment is very modern, and
Yeah.
I think it's a building that has gotten too archaic. I think it's Colts building that's gotten a little too old, and I think this will bring a little bit more of a modern and necessary approach, particularly when you have the 4th overall pick and you're going to commit to a young quarterback.
Yeah, that's a great point that you made. I was listening to you and Jake's show this morning. You had Rick Venturi on there. We love Rick Venturi on this show as well. He always just lets you have it how he sees it. He mentioned Gus Bradley being retained. Are you a fan of the Gus Bradley, just keeping that whole staff intact? I know there's a little bit of history when it comes to those two together. Just are you a fan in general, or is Gus in a situation where he's going to have to show you a little more if we're going to move forward past this year? I know they haven't made anything formal yet, but it sure seems like it's heading that direction.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say I'd be content with it. I know that might not sound like the biggest ringing endorsement. And maybe I have too high of a standard, but I do feel like I would like to have seen a little bit more out of the defense. And again, they had a lot thrown on their plate. They were thrown in some awful situations. I can truly acknowledge that. But at the same time, I think with the amount of talent that you do have, really at every level of that unit, I think it should be a consistent kind of top 10 defense. And I don't think it was that last year. Again, really thrown into some poor situations. And I think for Shane Steichen, I don't want to force any coaches on him. This is the head coach of the football team. Let him run the show as how he wants to run it. I said this way about Frank in the Matt Eberflus era, and obviously Eberflus was put on Frank's plate. I always found it odd that Frank was this uber aggressive offensive coach, and yet Matt Eberflus didn't coach that way defensively. And in a way, that's kind of what Steichen and Bradley are like. Again, it's not apples to apples, but Shane is very aggressive, and I don't get the sense that Gus is as aggressive as you would like him to be, at least in my opinion. I think you need to dictate to your opponents a little bit better. Rick rattled off a lot of stats this morning that were pretty damning. And again, a few of those you can certainly point to your offense not putting you in great situations. But I look at your ability to affect the passer. That to me is the biggest thing defensively in today's NFL. And I don't feel like from a pressure consistency standpoint, you got enough. It was a decent number, certainly, but just from a particularly late in games, I didn't feel like you got to that level and you didn't get your hands on enough balls on the back end. And that's twofold. That's pressure, and that's guys at the back end making plays as well. Those are some areas that I would like to see improvement. So I totally understand why you would want to bring Gus Bradley back, and he would be a 3rd defensive coordinator in 3 years. If you went away from that, there's continuity in the building. Definitely bring back Bubba Ventrone. I think that to me is a no-brainer. But if Shane Steichen wants to, do something differently, I will not, fret too much about it.
Yeah, flipping over onto the other side of the football and offense, a little bit of Jim Bob Cooter, might be coming to town, having a conversation at least about that OC job. Just your thoughts. I'm curious. I think I'm of the mind I like a more established offensive coordinator because I want a guy who's maybe not going to be a head coach, right? He's just set in stone. He's going to be that OC for years to come, and they can really build that relationship with a young quarterback. Are you on that side of the fence, or do you want one of the new up-and-comers, one of the guys, one of the hot young names when it comes down to the offensive coordinator position?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if I'm super married to like anything, to be honest with you, or too set in stone in that. I mean, you can look at it a couple of ways. Do you look at the quarterback coach hire as even more important and look at that relationship as something that, over time, if your OC does have great success and it is, kind of a Sirianni sort of situation where they move on to a different job, even though they're not calling the plays, do you just promote your quarterback's coach to OC and then you still have that relationship inside your building with the young quarterback and his position coach? I think that's something to explore. I think it's good to have kind of a challenging personality, a little bit of a different personality. I felt like that's what made Frank and Nick pretty successful and why that relationship worked. So I think that's something that you would want to tap into. But I think Shane made this pretty clear on Tuesday. This is going to be his baby. And obviously, how he delegates things from there will be a huge storyline. I know you and I have talked about it, Zach. I felt like in the Reich era, just at times he kind of lost sight of you are the head coach of this football team. And, hiring people on game day to kind of help you out there, or, again, having an offensive coordinator certainly that you trust during the week, to where if you need to be in some other, position meetings or on different sides of the ball, you don't feel like you are losing something by not being with that offense. I think that is really, really important. So, some of the names, certainly have, young backgrounds. I mean, Jibob Cooter, you bring up. I mean, he was a part of a couple pretty good Detroit Lion teams, which I know is not something you typically say. Yeah, obviously, Pep Hamilton has worked with young quarterbacks prior. I would even like, if Steichen kind of went outside of this coaching tree again, just to get some challenging thoughts in here. I think Shane already has a really good grasp on the college side of it and being adaptable to that. But that is always something that I think staffs can, try and tap into a little bit more. So for me, if I'm kind of ranking hires, obviously the defensive coordinator, offensive line coach, I think you could argue means more than offensive coordinator, just given the need to, get those veterans to start giving you the return on investment that you have in them. And Bernard Ryman still has growth. I think you have to be encouraged by what Ryman showed, but you still need another jump to really cross that position off the needs list.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of great points you made there. When you think of the relationship between, Shane Steichen, Chris Ballard, I feel like that's so vital, right? Like that, you really need to be in lockstep. It's not always going to be perfect. A little bit of friction may be necessary. Do you feel like that Steichen will have the autonomy to go up to Chris and say, hey, we need more, man. Like we need more in the cupboard? Or do you feel like it's going to be, Shane, you're the coach, I'm the general manager, and that's the structure that we have set in place? I know it's very early on, Kevin, when it comes to that, so more to come, but just your initial thoughts.
No, I mean, it's a necessary question. He has to demand that, and I think Shane will just point to kind of where he's been. I mean, obviously the Eagles, we all saw it firsthand, the investments they've made, in particular at tight end and wideout. But I mean, look at the Chargers. I mean, I don't think you've ever said the Chargers have a shortage of skill talent.
Yeah.
They don't. I mean, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams for several years. Obviously, Austin Eckler is a really good player. You go back to, when Antonio Gates was there. So I do think that Shane understands that. Hopefully Chris will realize that the roster building approach has not worked and that you do need to make some investments there. And, just look at the Super Bowl. I mean, each of the two teams' leading receivers, they weren't on that team the previous year with Juju Smith-Schuster and A.J. Brown. And that to me, I think is you have some invested draft picks, whether you look at, I mean, your top three wideouts this year were all first or second round picks of your organization. I guess all of them second round picks. You look at the tight end position, you have some high draft picks there. To me, it's just kind of bolstering both of those groups with a veteran body or with someone that's a little bit more that you can trust. I felt like, in a way, you even missed Jack Doyle and Zach Pascal a whole lot, and those guys can be helpful and reliable guys for you. So, I've made this analogy before. I think Frank Reich walked into the kitchen, looked around, and said, I can make something work here with what you're giving me. I'd like to think that Shane Steichen can walk in there and, say, oh, I'd really like an A.J. Brown. I'd really like a Dallas Goedert. We need a little bit more. I think particularly when your quarterback is young. I mean, if you saw what Buffalo did in trading for Stephon Diggs early in the Josh Allen tenure, or certainly what Jacksonville did last year. I mean, that right there had Chris Ballard cackling in his office in all likelihood of paying Christian Kirk that type of money, paying Zay Jones that type of money, paying Evan Ingram that type of money. But what Jacksonville said is, we have a quarterback going into year 2. And if he has another year like he had his rookie year, we might never get him back. And so I think it's so, so vital that you provide that for your quarterback, very early in his tenure to feel that. Reggie Wayne for Andrew Luck in that 2012 season. I just think it's so important to give your quarterback safety, safety valves, security blankets, whatever you want to call it. And, kind of a position that's popped in my head that, Shane mentioned on Tuesday in reference to Justin Herbert. I'm curious what they do at running back from a pass catching standpoint. I know that might not be top of mind for, a lot of people, and maybe it's just, Part of me is like, Kevin, why are you wasting time even saying it? But Steichen mentioned on Tuesday, something that he told Justin Herbert a lot is, checking it down can be your best friend. And obviously, when you check it down to Austin Eckler, that really really helps. But Zach Moss and Jonathan Taylor, I think both are more first and second down guys. And Moss showed you a lot last year. What's your third down back look like without Nyheim Hines? Because I do think for a young quarterback, providing that check down ability will be huge.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that the blueprint's been laid out, right, Kevin? Like we know that you have to have multiple wide receivers. Just having a number one in modern football is probably not enough. Back in the day, you just needed to have a really good running back, really good wide receiver, and then the rest played out. You got to go out there and get plenty of weapons when it comes to that. Speaking of weapons, weapon number one is going to be the quarterback position. You're sitting at 4. Night before the draft, and you're a betting man, because I think I know you are a betting man. You got 2 bets. I'm either pushing all my chips in that Chris Ballard's going to push all of his chips in and go up to 1, or he's staying pat at number 4. Where's your money at, man?
Yeah.
I know where mine's at. I'll just answer first. Hey, I'm keeping my money, because I don't think that's going to happen, but we'll see.
Yeah, part of me thinks, will Jim Irsay demand it? I do think that's kind of an element of the process as well. I would trade up. Now, again, I'm not holding my breath saying Ballard would. I just find it, and in talking with Chris, very rarely do you have all the quarterbacks rated the same or similar. I mean, there is separation with these quarterbacks. Even if they're drafted just a spot or 2 away from each other, that doesn't mean that Team A evaluated them in that same manner or looks at them in that same manner. For me, with Houston lurking at 2 and then 2 kind of quarterback set teams, let's just assume Chicago and Arizona are not taking a quarterback. That's not what you want if you're the Colts above you, because those are 2 teams that obviously are just going to dangle trade bait in Chicago and Arizona, and they don't care, who comes up, just give you the best package possible, and we're going to happily say yes. And then obviously you have a team in your division that has vastly more draft capital than you do, in the Houston Texans. So if there is separation there, to me, you have to move up. You can't play the hope game. You can't play the waiting game. Maybe this is in reference to the Andrew Luck story that came out back, a few months ago on ESPN.com. But you saw in that story, the whole Andrew Luck would order meals for people at dinner. He would tell you what you're going to have for dinner. I love you, Zach. I want to order for myself. I don't want you to pick off the menu. You might pick something that I like, but that's too much hope. That it's out of my control. I want to be in control. Do you give up something? You certainly do, but unless you get that position right, it's not going to matter who you draft in the second round or what you look at next year in the draft. So that's kind of how I view things. To me, you just can't sit and wait. I think it's such a dangerous game to play at the quarterback position. I think back to when Mahomes was drafted by the Chiefs. It came out that the Saints really wanted Patrick Mahomes, and it was Mahomes' kind of agency that informed Kansas City of this. So Kansas City knew they had to get above New Orleans. Well, look at the Saints post Drew Brees. They are looking, they are searching without success to find that guy, and they thought they could sit and wait for Patrick Mahomes. It's just a game that I just don't want to play. I know there's cons to it. I totally acknowledge that. But I think it's really important that if you identify someone that you have above others on the board, to me, you got to go up and get that. Now, will Ballard do it? It's a totally fair question. Will Irsay be involved? Yeah. I mean, all of it to me is just such an interesting debate with a lot of without a lot of true conviction, because it's such a foreign spot the Colts have been in. And when you think about this too, Zach, I know I'm rambling a bit, so apologies. Shane Steichen and Chris Ballard don't have a lot of history, hardly at all, of drafting quarterbacks high in any draft.
Yeah.
I mean, Steichen, Rivers was handed to him. Justin Herbert was the 3rd QB out of those 3 back in 2019 or 2020. And then Hurts, of course, was drafted before he got there. You look at Ballard, yes, he was early on in the Mahomes evaluation, but there's not a lot of draft history there either. So this adds to kind of the unknown of it all.
Yeah, I mean, you made a lot of great points. I've said for two reasons you got to trade up. A, you know who's sitting there at number two, right? And if you sit there and pass that opportunity up, that number two team who's in your division, you're going to face that guy for the next 10 or 12 years.
Yeah.
Are you willing to go up against that guy for the next 10 or 12 years? If that answer is no, then you got to move up. As well as, he's made the comment in prior years with, in regards to the trading up, if I like the guy, if he's the right guy. Well, if he's not the right guy and you don't trade up to one, then what does that say if you sit at four? Do you not feel good about it? Does nobody stand out above the rest? And it's kind of a lazy approach, in my opinion, because, I mean, that is the part of being a general manager, being able to identify who is the guy in this draft. Should be very, very interesting. Before we go here, we all know about the number 4 pick, free agency. Just the approach. You think there's going to be a little bit of a nudge from Jim Irsay to say, hey, we might want to be a little more open-minded when it comes to free agency this year than we have been in the past? Or do you think business as usual, we just keep going down this path, we draft the quarterback, and then we see what we got a year from now?
Yeah, part of me just says I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah.
You would like to think that such an embarrassing season would lend to a little bit of a different approach. I mean, to be fair, and I fully expect some cap savings moves to occur in the next few weeks, but they aren't in as great of a cap situation as they have been in years past. They still are in a very favorable one and can certainly make more of that room. To me, and this goes back to the roster building question that I've asked Ballard, seemingly each of definitely the last 2 off seasons, are maybe even longer than that. To me, it's if you haven't had success utilizing the plan that you have been utilizing, don't you have to alter it? I'm not saying totally rip it to pieces. I've always felt like you need to find kind of that happy medium between Ryan Grigson's approach and Chris Bauer's approach. Because I've said this before, and I've even said this to Chris. I'm like, when you've used free agency, you've found success. I mean, look last year, Stephon Gilmore was a very successful free agent signing.
Yeah.
But you point to some of those pass catchers, whether it was with Trevor Lawrence or what Valdez Scantling gave Kansas City late in the playoffs, or Juju then gave them later on in the playoffs. Those are important pieces as well. That again, in the early part of free agency, that's when you can really kind of patch a hole or two. And if you're going to trade up in the draft, you've got to realize you might miss out on that second round pick or something like that. So that puts more of an emphasis to me on free agency. Again, I'll believe it when I see it, man, because we are now 6 years into it. This is the 7th year. And again, I'm not saying you need to go out there and do what Grigson did in 2013 or Grigson did in 2015. But if you can find 1 to 2 guys that we look back on the end of the year and say, that was a top 15 player for you, that is hugely important. Doesn't put as much pressure on your rookie class where you couldn't afford Alec Pierce-Laws this year. You couldn't afford Jelani Woods-Laws this year. Yeah. And you had some of that. They also had really good moments, but you had laws from both of those guys. And when you have that, you're going to get exposed. And your passing offense, for more reasons than just that, was exposed.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. All great points, guys. Thank you so much for hopping on this podcast. If you haven't already, like, rate, review, share, and subscribe, as well as head on over to Kevin's Corner podcast if you already haven't. I'm sure you have at this point. 107.5 The Fan. Every morning, 7 to 10, him and Jake do a great job. He does a really, really good job of keeping Jake in his place, or at least he tries, right? I mean, that's all you can hope for, right, Kevin?
Yeah, I've got a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old. It feels like I babysit the 50-year-old as well, Monday through Friday. So, as always, man, thanks for having me. Always enjoy it, Zach.
Absolutely. As always, go Colts.